What if I told you that Charles Manson was innocent? One of the most notorious serial killers in American history, the one everybody has heard about, never actually killed anybody. What if I told you that with today's forensic evidence and DNA testing and things of that nature that we do now, that Charles Manson would have walked out of court a free man? Good afternoon and welcome to True Crime Decoded. I'm Scott Rolle, your host. Today we're going to do a deep dive into the case involving Charles Manson, decoding the Manson case. August 9th and 10th, 1969, hot summer days in Los Angeles. 4 members of the Charles Manson's notorious family left the abandoned Spahn ranch in northern L.A., drove to the house that was occupied by Sharon Tate, a famous actress at the time, and the wife of Roman Polanski. As they arrived, there were 4 other people in the house, and they were slaughtered by 4 members of the Manson family. The next night, they went back out to the La Bianca residence and killed 2 more people. Charles Manson wasn't there on the first night, and while he was there the second night and tied up the La Biancas, he actually didn't kill them or anybody else. With us today is Joe Racioppi, better known as Jersey Joe. Joe is a lawyer, he's a writer, friend of mine from law school, and a notorious conspiracy theorist. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Joe, we're going to do a deep dive into the Manson case, and we're going to specifically talk about the evidence that was put forth at trial and whether or not, if this case was tried today in 2025, whether he would have walked out a free man. You've actually been looking into this case for many years, including having been out to the scene of most of the areas where this has happened. Is that right?
That is correct. And it's a fascinating concept you're putting forth that he may have been found not guilty in a different trial because he did not kill any of the victims at the Tate residence or the La Bianca residence. That is correct.
Yet he was convicted of all of the murders and actually sentenced to death. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they all were. And it is analogous to, a mafia don sending a hitman out to kill someone. He's as guilty as the trigger man, and that's what happened here. And as we've discussed this a lot amongst ourselves, Manson was he had the look of a monster. He had the long hair. He was had the look of the drug crazed hippie, and I think that really hurt him. And any jury, I think, was going to convict him because L.A., as you know from reading about the case, was scared shitless about what happened on these 2 nights. And I don't want to correct the host, but I do think the first murder was August 8th, is Friday, and we went into the 9th, 1969. And
Yeah, it was late. It was 10 o'clock over to midnight. Is that right?
or even as late as 11:45 over to midnight. But the only reason I'm nitpicky about that is as you know, there's a huge Beatle and Beach Boy connection. And you're in a band, you love music, I do as well. And the Beatles were my favorite band growing up. They have a huge part in this whole case. The very term "helter skelter" comes from the White Album, song by Paul McCartney. It was misspelled on the at the La Bianca residence refrigerator, Healter. I think that was Patricia Krenwinkel misspelling it, but it really has nothing to do with murder. A helter skelter is a spiral staircase slide covered by something that looks like a lighthouse in England. That's why he talks about I go up and down, round and round. And so the Beatles have a huge role in this. And the reason I mentioned August 8th was that happens to be the day they shot the cover of the Abbey Road album. As you know, the famous crossing of Abbey Road was shot on August 8th, 1969 by Ian McMillan. Hours later, the Tate residence was invaded by the Manson family members, which to me is a shocking coincidence.
Well, there's definitely a Beatles and even a Beach Boys tie-in with this case. But let's jump back for the people that aren't really familiar with it. Most people think, oh, Charles Manson, he killed a whole bunch of people. That's why he went to jail and he had the death penalty and he never got it and he died 8 years ago, whatever it is. What about the case do most of us not know?
Well, let me just tell you what my interest in the case started with the 1976 TV version of the trial. I was fascinated by it. The actor who played Manson was excellent, but I also read Bugliosi's Helter Skelter, written with a guy named Gentry. It says in the inside cover, "This book will scare the hell out of you," and it did. It was a fascinating true crime book, and I believe best-selling crime book to this day.
Well, and one of the interesting things about the book is that Bugliosi went out with the police during the investigation stage, did he not, and helped them uh, solve the crime, which I think was one of the reasons I became a prosecutor. Actually, I thought that was a pretty cool way to do it. So, is that the best description of everything that happened?
Absolutely. It's got photos, but to give the audience who, this is 56 years ago now, so who knows what the audience knows, but just to give an overview, um, Manson, who we just discussed, did not commit any of the murders. The main killer was Charles Tex Watson from Texas. He had a hand in probably all seven of the Tate LaBianca murders. At the minimum, all six. Patricia Krenwinkel may have killed Abigail Folger by herself, but there's also um, snippets I've read where Tex helped her also. She was asking for help. When they chased her out onto the lawn, her body and Wojciech Frykowski's body were found on the lawn of the Tate residence the next morning. But Manson was not at the residence that night. It was Tex Watson, Linda Kasabian driving, age only 20, um, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Susan Atkins. And poor Steve Parent, who was the first victim, was visiting the caretaker, William Garrettson. Parent was only 18. He's on his way out. Talk about the unluckiest of timing ever. If he left 10 minutes earlier or later, he would be alive today, probably. So he's on his way out. The killers are climbing up the hill over the fence. Tex cut the wires to the house so they couldn't make a phone call. And Steve Parent pulls up in his Rambler, and he says, "Please don't hurt me." And Tex stabs him or slices his wristwatch that was cut, and then shoots him, I think, 4 times, and he dies instantly right there, and he's begging for his life. That was the first murder. Then they went in, they cut the screen of the one of the windows, climbed in. Abigail Folger was reading on her bed, and as a little aside, she is the coffee heiress from the Folger coffee maker.
Okay.
She was the heiress to that family. Sharon Tate, as everyone I think knows, was a up and coming beautiful blonde actress, age 26, 8.5 months pregnant. She was another victim, probably the last one. Jay Sebring was a famous Hollywood hairdresser. He was her ex-boyfriend. He was still friends with her and visiting that night. He was shot and killed by Tex, stabbed, and the guy who took the worst beating was Wojciech Frykowski, who was Roman Polanski's friend. Polanski, people should know, he wasn't very famous. He was a filmmaker, most famous at that point for 1968's Rosemary's Baby, which was about a movie where a woman gives birth to the devil's child. Really creepy stuff.
So who were the people that went to the house? I mean, we hear about the Manson family. They were a bunch of hippies that lived at an old movie ranch where they used to film films,
Hmm.
and Manson sort of recruited them, I guess. The word is from the Haight-Ashbury district up in San Francisco, but
Yes.
they ended up in L.A. right at this old movie ranch, and they all lived there in sort of a communal situation, right? And they claim Manson had some sort of power and control over them, and of course, ultimately alleged it was enough to commit murder. So, what was the Spahn Ranch, and what were people doing there, and why were they following this weird guru guy that was actually substantially older than most of them?
Yeah, he was 32. He had this hold over women, especially, but also men. He got Tex to join and Bobby Beausoleil and other bikers, Danny DiCarlo. So it wasn't the men were there probably for the women, but he did meet that some in San Francisco. And then can you picture them driving down to LA in a school bus or a van? And then Spahn Ranch was an abandoned movie ranch owned by George Spahn, who was about 80 and blind. Allegedly, he let them stay there if they took care of the horses and gave horseback riding, or let people ride the horses up around the property, which is very pretty to this day. I went out there, and you can stand on a cliff and overlook and see the outline of the corral. It's really amazing because obviously the mountains don't change that much over 56 years, but
Yeah, it looks pretty much the same out there today as it did back in '69, doesn't it?
yeah, but everything's gone. There's nothing left except I dug up some barbed wire under the weeds. There's still some of the corral there. The Manson Cave is absolutely a must see. It's a short walk from the ranch.
That was at the Manson cave. Is that the famous Life magazine photo of the family sitting? It's like a rock formation, and it looks like a cave. That you saw that as well. That's still there. All right, so they're living at this ranch, and it's it's like a communal living situation. I think they used to dumpster dive for their food, and even children that were born while they were there were lived on the ranch and things of that nature. So didn't it start off pretty nice? I mean, it was kind of a utopic atmosphere for hippies at that time, free love, and everybody was happy, and drugs and all that good stuff, right?
Right. It's the whole case. The aura, I think, of the case is the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and then the horrific crimes, completely killing the peace, love, and hippie movement. I believe single-handedly that ruined the movement. But in the end, he was a scumbag. He would allegedly direct the orgies, who was going to have sex with whom. He controlled every aspect of their lives if you listen to the post-crime interviews. So that would be go against your theory. He may be found not guilty, but he was at the La Bianca scene, but only to tie them up. Then he left.
Well, let's talk about the motive then, because why would these hippies, for lack of a better term, this family of teenage 20s-year-old people living communally on a abandoned movie ranch, free rent, I guess, maybe making a few bucks renting horseback rides, things of that nature. Why would four of them leave the ranch one night, go to an arbitrary place in the hills of California, LA, and slaughter five people, if you include Stephen Parent?
That's easy. The theory is he had a hold over them like Jim Jones did over the people who drank the Kool-Aid in Guyana. He was 10 years older about. Tex was only 23, he believe it or not. And I've told you this before. The murder should accurately be called the Watson murders, not the Manson murders. Again, because he had a hand in all of the murders, and he was not part of that circus atmosphere of the trial.
But why would they do it? Why? What was the motive? I know if you read the book Helter Skelter, obviously Vincent Bugliosi, the lead prosecutor, decided that Manson, who was a racist and believed that, or at least wanted to start a race war, and that a race war would occur. And once it did, the family would go into the desert, find a big black hole that existed in the desert. They actually drove around looking for this from time to time. And they would live down there until the race war was over, right? And then they would come out and rule the world. So Bugliosi's theory was that Manson wanted to get the race war started. Does that make sense to you? And he was convicted on this theory.
It had nothing to do with a race war. That's just ridiculous. That killing a couple of rich white families was going to incite a race war, that the blacks were going to win. And then when they couldn't run things, Manson was going to come out and take over leadership, as if they would willingly turn it over to him. It was complete hogwash, as they say. I think the motive was copycat murders to get Bobby Beausoleil off, because he had killed Gary Hinman.
And who is Bobby Beausoleil for people that don't know?
He's a member of the family who killed Gary Hinman, who was allegedly inheriting money, which was not true. The poor guy was in his apartment. They had him there for 2 days tied up. Manson came back, sliced his ear off, and then Bobby Beausoleil came back and killed him. And then he's such an idiot. He takes Hinman's car and he falls asleep in his car, and is picked up with the bloody clothes in the car and the knife he used to stab him. And he's still in jail to this day.
And I think that's one of the things people don't realize. So that murder happened prior to the Tate LaBianca murders, right? The murder
July
of Gary
27th,
Hinman.
yes.
Okay. So Manson goes out to Gary Hinman's place, was trying to get money from him. Hinman said he didn't have any, and I think Manson used a machete and cut off the lower part of his ear, which, I'm not saying Manson's a good guy. I'm just wondering whether would be convicted today, and we'll get to that shortly. But so Manson cuts off the lower ear of Gary Hinman, sends Bobby Beausoleil out to kill him. Beausoleil kills him, and then you think potentially one of the theories to cover up that crime and take the attention away from the family, they go out and do the murders in L.A. So what was the similarities that they were trying to do to sort of pin it on somebody else?
Yeah, there's a Black Panther paw on the wall in Hinman's house. It says "political piggy."
Yeah, Piggy's was written in Hinman's blood, and they did a paw print in Hinman's blood as well, political piggy, and a paw print was to try to make it look like the Black Panthers had committed the murder,
Correct.
right?
Which
Okay.
which goes to the theory they were, but I think that was just to blame the Black Panthers, not to start a race war. But if what's not talked about is you're familiar with the door of the Tate residence where it says pig in Sharon Tate's blood. I think there's a paw print on the door, that nobody talks about. I think it was there too. They talk about a Helter Skelter song. Piggies obviously is on the White Album, but there's a song. I think it's on Abbey Road where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all good children go to heaven. That's written on the door. That I think what rock group bought the door?
9 Inch Nails, Trent Reznor.
Yes, I think they bought Sharon Tate's door. I think the one I'm talking about was at the ranch.
Oh,
There
I
was
know which one.
two.
The cabinet door where Manson was found arrested hiding or something.
Yes, there was actually both ranches had raids, Barker Ranch and Spahn Ranch, and the one where he's in that cabinet that you can barely fit in was, I think, Barker Ranch. But there is a door that has those words, but I think Bugliosi missed it. He didn't know the Beatles, had that chorus in one of their songs. Not that it's a big deal, but I'm just bringing it up now because no one else ever does.
All right, so you think one of the theories was to cover up the murder of Gary Hinman, Manson had 4 people from his family go out and kill the other 4 people to make it look like it was the same reason?
Copycat murder, yes. So because Bosley is in jail, so if the murders are still going on, obviously he wasn't him that did it.
Yeah, that makes more sense. So Bousselet's in jail. If another murder with people's blood and writing on the wall, same word, pig, piggy, political piggy, that would certainly do that. So then, if that's the case, why wouldn't the prosecutor, do you think, Bugliosi, use that theory? And why go to the LaBianca house the next night? Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. Lino was a grocery store owner, and his wife, they had come back from boating all day. And Manson arbitrarily, and we'll talk about how they found that house, the members of the family, including Tex Watson, killed them the next night. So what, same thing, trying to do yet another one? Because they wrote on the wall in blood at the LaBianca residence as well, right?
Correct. They wrote, I think, piggies on that wall, but that was also the Helter Skelter misspelling on the refrigerator
Okay.
where they had actually hung out and made sandwiches and I think took showers. And I don't know why they went out again. I can't answer that, but it's really bizarre that like my question. I wrote down a slew of questions if I ever got to interview any of these people, the family members. How long was this going to go on for? Were you ready to go out a third night? Did you have any hesitation about going? I just can't imagine you can do all that killing and then just keep doing it. I don't understand it.
The first person killed on Cielo Drive at the Tate residence was a young man who was leaving the residence at the time in his own car.
Think about the quirks of fate in this case. If Steve Parent doesn't pick up William Garrettson, the caretaker at Cielo Drive, if he doesn't pick him up hitchhiking, he never goes back.
He had been there to visit the caretaker, who we forgot to mention was on the property when it happened, in the
Yes,
caretaker's house.
was arrested.
But was arrested because he was the original suspect, but was not harmed. But anyway, those 2 guys are meeting allegedly to discuss the sale of a clock radio, which seems odd to me. But that's and then he's leaving. Had he left 5 minutes earlier, he'd be alive to tell his story today.
Well, not only that, they both involve hitchhiking. If Dennis Wilson doesn't pick up Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey, whatever her name was, they never meet Dennis and move in, and Terry Melcher never meets him. It's very, that's how life is, I guess. You can do that with every life, I guess, in all events. But the poor guy, even if he goes to the house, I'm talking about Steve Parent, like you said, 5 minutes earlier or later, and he may have missed everything. But Garrettson was arrested. His polygraph was inconclusive because I do think he lied. He said he didn't hear a thing, and I think he lied. Later on in an interview, he admits he heard screaming.
So why wouldn't he call the police? Was he too scared to call?
I think he was scared, too scared shitless.
Did I read later too that he saw somebody tried the doorknob to his caretaker's hut?
The guy was such a space cadet. He said he was on drugs and he thought 2 men in suits came to the door with a baby. How creepy is that? But that was, I think, a hallucination.
Can you imagine, though, being that guy, having to live with that the rest of your life? How lucky and how close to death? You came?
He was from Ohio. He went back right away after this. In fact, they had to bring him back from Ohio to testify.
Yeah, his life was never the same. And the motive is the issue I have, because in a criminal case, motive is not proof. You don't have to have motive to convict somebody. But the jury is instructed that motive is helpful. If you think there is a motive, you can use that to show someone is guilty. But if there's a lack of motive, you can also show that is reason someone would not be not guilty. So that's sort of how motive works. But it just is bizarre to me that, and especially with other connections, because weren't there other connections with the Tate House originally before Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate moved in? A guy named Terry Melcher had lived there, and Melcher was a music producer, right? And Manson wanted to record an album, and he thought Melcher would be his to the big time. So wasn't that another potential motive?
I think it absolutely was, but it still doesn't make any sense.
Well,
if
give
you
us the
believe
details
it.
of that if you.
Well, let's start off with the owner of the house. Rudy Altobelli owned the house on Cielo Drive. He rents it to Terry Melcher, who is the music producer and the son of Doris Day, who the younger folks in the audience will not know. She was an extremely famous American actress and singer in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So there's all this fame. Her son, Terry Melcher, actually met Manson through Dennis Wilson,
And Dennis Wilson was the Beach Boys
Beach
drummer,
Boys drummer. Yes,
right?
I'm assuming people know who that is. Good point. He picks up Patricia Krenwinkel, one of the family members who was at both murder sites. He picks her up hitchhiking. This is before the murders, with Ella Jo Bailey, who I don't know much about. She's not a main member, but she was the other one he picked up. The Manson family winds up moving into Dennis Wilson's house on Sunset Boulevard. For months, they wrecked the house, they wrecked his Mercedes, and he was begging his manager to get rid of him. He moved out of his own house, and then they finally got Manson out of there, but not before he was impressed enough with Manson's music to go out to the Spahn Ranch and hear him sing. If you listen to one of Manson's songs, uh, "Look at Your Game, Girl," it's not bad. You've heard it. There's some talent there.
There's a time for living. The time keeps on flying. Think you're loving, baby, and all you're doing is crying. Can you feel? Are those feelings real? Look at your game, girl.
So Manson was a wannabe. A lot of people don't know that. Manson was a wannabe musician, right? Wrote songs and actually wasn't bad. I mean, he never commercially released anything, but all over the internet you can hear some of his songs, and I have heard him. And you're right. There's one, "Look at Your Game, Girl," is pretty good.
He did release an album after 1970, or someone released it on his behalf. But to your point about motive, here's where it comes in. Melcher went out to see him and was not impressed enough to, do anything further. And apparently, Manson went to Melcher's house on Cielo Drive, but he had already moved out. So there is a theory, and it's in Bugliosi's book, that Sharon Tate may have seen Manson come up the driveway, and someone in the house told him to get lost, and that pissed him off.
So what was Manson doing at the house? Looking for Melcher, right?
Yeah, he probably wanted to say, "Hey, why can we try again? I want to." He was, he got pretty close to when you get a record producer to listen to you, you're getting pretty close.
That's true. And from what I read about that, Melcher told Charlie, "Look, you're actually pretty good. You got some talent. I just don't know what to do with you."
Yeah, it didn't go anywhere. And Manson's allegedly said, "Go to Terry Melcher's house and kill everyone there," knowing he didn't live there. He got close. Man, can you imagine if they recorded him, how things would have been different?
Well, it might have been, because if he had gotten a record deal, he could be a famous musician now on his 15th farewell tour.
He had a motive to kill Dennis Wilson or the Beach Boys because, I don't know if you're aware of this, Charles Manson wrote a song, I forget the original title, but the Beach Boys changed it to "Never Learn Not to Love," put it on their 2020 album with changed title, lyrics, and music, but they still used a lot of Manson's music. He did not get credit for it. I've read they paid him cash and a motorcycle for it, but I heard he was incensed when he found out he did not get a songwriting credit for the song.
All right, so that was what made Manson angry at Dennis Wilson was not that he didn't get paid for it, because basically he did with a motorcycle and cash, but that he didn't get credit. Well, and I think he also didn't like that they changed the lyrics and the title.
Changed the lyrics. He was incensed about that. But how many people know a Charles Manson song or part of it is on a Beach Boys official album 2020?
I think very few people would know that. And of course, Dennis Wilson was not was threatened by Manson, but obviously not killed by him. He ended up drowning some years later.
1983.
But this was all around the time when Manson had basically uninvitedly moved himself into the house. See, that's what's interesting, because I think a lot of people that are looking for the motive in this crime that's different than the prosecutor put forth at trial, and there's lots of different ones. One of them was that Manson thought Terry Melcher was still there, and he went to obviously seek his revenge for not getting the record contract. But that's provably false, right?
If you read even the Wikipedia article, it'll say Manson did it to scare Terry Melcher because he definitely knew he did not live there anymore. That's my reading of it. And if he didn't, that would explain the motive more clearly. But that's what's so frightening about this case, the randomness of these crimes. Like, if he knew he didn't live there and just said, go to Terry Melcher's house and kill everyone there, how scary is that?
So do you think the motive was, like you said, to scare Terry Melcher? Or do you think it was better that he was trying to show a copycat crime to cover up for Bobby Beausoleil? Which theory do you think carries
I think
more
it's
weight?
copycat and maybe a combination of both, because whether that was the motive or not to scare Terry Melcher, he was scared shitless. He had bodyguards. He was going into counseling after this. It
He
worked.
thought he was next, right? He
He
was
thought he
next.
was next. There was a list the family had. Frank Sinatra was on it, Steve McQueen, a whole bunch of celebrities. And as you know, the gun sales went through the roof. You couldn't get guard dogs. And this case is the reason I have firearms in my house to this day, because this is the boogeyman coming in out of nowhere with no reason. Well, allegedly, maybe no rhyme or reason. Certainly the LaBiancas, he didn't know them at all from Adam.
I can't believe that somebody spent 9 months trying a case and convinced a jury that the motive behind it was a crazy effort to start a race war. And I think all the evidence points away from that. Not the evidence that didn't happen. I think I think Manson, when they were doing their acid and sitting around in their camper fires, they talked about that. And he told stories because he was a fanciful storyteller. I think all that happened. But at the end of the day, I mean, one of the jurors wrote a book, fascinating, about their experience, but they didn't really go into whether they bought that as the motive or not. And I'm not sure at the end of the day it mattered.
No, I think he was going to be found guilty.
Yeah, right, for many reasons. If they believed that they were told by him to do it and that they were under his control, boom, he's guilty. But I think your theory, too, that I hate to say this, but his look, his scary look, his antics in court, the way he behaved, he lunged at the judge once with a pencil. Jurors watch these things and they think, should I let this guy go? A lot of pressure on him not to let that guy get acquitted.
That's not their job. But as you know, when a defendant does not testify in his defense, it's a bad look. I know you're innocent until proven guilty, and that's your right not to testify. But you cannot tell me, and you know this from being a judge, that the jurors, they want to hear from the defendant.
If you look at 2025, and as a lawyer and as a prosecutor, defense attorney, I've tried many, many complicated criminal cases. And maybe it's because of television, maybe it's because of books that we're reading now, but jurors want forensic evidence. They want fingerprints. They want DNA. So here you fast forward the Charles Manson case. You've got a murder scene. You've got people clearly that were involved that have admitted it to other people. And in fact, your star witness was there and can give you a minute-by-minute account of what happened. But the main guy, the guy that everybody wanted, the guy that everybody talks about, the Manson murders, was not there and didn't kill anybody.
He gets all the credit, if you will.
Why do you think that is? Is it because he was scary looking? Because he was
Scary
creepy?
looking, and he was, like I said, Tex was not at the original trial. He was not there. The only person people saw as the leader was Charlie Manson, and all his family of girls camped outside the courthouse singing, shaving their heads, carving swastikas in their forehead. It scared the shit out of people, as it would now, I think. And it was not a hard verdict to get. I think he could have used any motive. I think he picked the worst one because that whole thing is absurd to me. Killing two rich white families is going to start a race war. Even a crazed hippie isn't that stupid, I don't think. But he went with it. He won. So you got to give him credit.
I absolutely, and he's the reason I became a prosecutor. That book is that good, and I love the way he did it. But it just amazes me, and believe me, I'm not advocating for Charles Manson in any way. I just, as a person who understands beyond a reasonable doubt and how high of a burden that is. It's a constitutional burden. It's very high, and it should be. It should be really hard to convict people of a crime. And when the main testimony, the main evidence, no forensic evidence, no physical evidence. There'd be a Ring camera today showing them going to the house, right?
Mhm.
And the next door neighbors you'd see him crossing the lawn. That's what we'd have today. Manson's in none of that. So you get a good defense attorney who's going to say, my client wasn't there. He didn't tell anybody to kill anybody. And the only people you're going to hear say that he did are the people that actually did the killing. And then this crazy theory that it was done to start a race war. I think it would be much more difficult, if not impossible, to convict him today.
Forensics, absolutely. People want that. It's more sound, certainly more sound than any eyewitness testimony, as you know.
Well, let me ask you this. In the trial, the jurors were sequestered. And we don't do that much today, but sequestration means that the jurors were sent to a hotel and they couldn't read a newspaper or watch TV for 9 months. This trial was 9 months long.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all kinds of crazy defense attorneys if you dig deep. So the jurors are not subject to any media information. At one point, Manson holds up a newspaper which the headline said, "Manson guilty, Nixon declares."
Yes.
President Nixon was president at the time. Shows it to the jury. The jury now sees this. The President of the United States is saying this guy's guilty. He must be. So the pressure had to be on these 12 people, big time.
I thought it was a good move on Manson's part. I have to be honest with you.
Right, but he makes it worse. He could have gotten a mistrial for doing that.
Well, that was the goal, maybe.
Because a mistrial, frankly, is the friend of the defendant. Well, I think that's enough to wrap it up for now, but make sure you're here next time because we're going to be talking about motive, the trial itself, and take an even deeper dive into the case involving Charles Manson. Don't forget to follow me on social media. It's Scott Rolle Decoded on Facebook. It's truecrimedecoded.ScottRolle on Instagram. Or you can email me at truecrimedecodedwithscottrolle@gmail. Be sure to comment. Let us know what you think. If you have an episode that you'd like to see us dig into, let us know. And certainly if we got anything wrong, we'd like to hear from you.